With only 47 games left this season, the clock is ticking on the New York Mets. And guess what their next test is? They got to go up against the best team in baseball on the road.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I'm actually now working as the editor-in-chief. Got a little promotion. So excited about that, but let's dive right into Mets baseball here, because this is a team that right now feels at this very moment like they're clinging to life support. That's what it feels like. That's what I think perception is currently among Mets fans. But if you really look at the situation they're in, they're 2.5 games back in the division. That is not dire straits whatsoever. If you look at what they're doing in the wild card race, what team is chasing them? Right now, if you look at it, the team that's next up or on the outside looking in is the Cincinnati Reds. The Mets are 3.5 games ahead of the Reds. They're a game behind the Padres, who are the second wild card spot. And if you look at the teams beyond that in the wild card race, you have the Giants, you have the Cardinals, you have the Marlins, the Diamondbacks, the Pirates, the Braves, the Nationals, the Rockies. You look at those last 4 teams, none of them within even 10 games. I don't see the Diamondbacks, with all the trades they made, suddenly surging back in the standings. The Marlins have been a fun story, but who knows if they can really sustain it. And they've just lost a couple games after getting back to 500. They're now 2 games under. The Cardinals sold. The Giants sold. The Reds bought, but very limitedly. So the Mets are in this position where they could almost fall into the playoffs and still, technically get that shot in the dance. And hey, you never know what happens. But they got to play better baseball than this. And if they keep losing 2 out of every 10 games, I do think in that world, the Reds, who could just play 500 baseball, would eventually catch them. So this team has to break out of it. And the question is, what's wrong? What has taken this team to the point where it's just a dreadful watch? It's the star players. It is. I mean, you can look up and down this lineup and nobody's really hitting. I mean, look at the last 30 days. There are 2 guys on the New York Mets with an OPS above 700 over the last 30 days. You have Mark Vientos at 721. You have Francisco Alvarez leading the team at 895. That's in 12 games. Alvarez hitting 278 since coming back, 395 on base, 500 slug, 7 walks to 9 strikeouts. Pretty good numbers for Alvi. And like I mentioned, Vientos is a 721 OPS. Not getting on base at a great clip, but he's hitting 284 over the last 20 games he's played in. Hasn't even hit too many home runs, only 1 homer, so not a ton of power there either. You got Starling Marte at 699 in 8 games, and then you get to the regular contributors. Ronnie Mauricio, 692 OPS. Jeff McNeil, 683 OPS. And then you start getting to the stars. Juan Soto, over his last 22 games played, is hitting a $167, a 309 on base, 372 slug. He has 5 home runs in the last 22 games, which that alone isn't too bad. But he hasn't done much of anything else. Brutal numbers for Juan Soto. Brandon Nimmo hitting 241, 343 on base, 322 slug. Slug has almost completely evaporated from his game. He's got a 665 OPS. Lindor, 611 OPS, 206 average, 260 on base, 351 slug, 3 home runs, 13 RBIs. Just has not been very good. Pete Alonso, last 23 games, 157 average, 221 on base, 325 slug, a 546 OPS. Torrens has been brutal, 524 OPS. Tyrone Taylor's been brutal, 400 OPS. In the first 5 games for Cedric Mullins, he is 1 for 14. So he hasn't helped immediately, although I'm not going to blame him for this offense. He just got here. Brett Beatty has been brutal, 207 average, 299 on base, 328 slug, 627 OPS. It's just awful offensive production. And if we shorten the sample up to the last 15 days to get a better idea of who's been hot, you do see Francisco Lindor is starting to come out of it, 787 OPS over his last 12 games played. Ronnie Mauricio in his last 8 games has a 995 OPS, couple home runs, couple of doubles. He's been very good in a very recent sample. But then it really falls off. Alvey, of course, still doing his thing. That's pretty much the same sample size. But then you get to Vientos. If you look at the most recent sample size, not good. 7 strikeouts, no walks, 698 OPS. Soto continuing to struggle. A lot like down the line, there's not even a hot hitter on this team. Lindor is the closest to one. And I will say he's hit into some hard outs as well. So maybe that's the one silver lining you could take for this offense is Lindor is starting to turn a corner, but really nobody else is. So if the Mets are going to get back on track, I mean, they need Juan, Soto, and Pete Alonso to be run producers in the middle of that lineup. They need Brandon Nimmo and Jeff McNeil to give you quality big league at-bats. And you need to get some pop from the lower parts of your lineup. You need Mark Vientos to find that power stroke again. You need Ronnie Mauricio when he's in there to do his thing and pop some homers. Brett Beatty to get back to being consistent offensively. I don't know if having all these guys playing a little bit and not having some everyday players is hurting the production of the guys at the bottom of the lineup. Would Ronnie Mauricio be better if he was just in there every single day? Or same thing with Brett Beatty or even Vientos. I mean, you can make those arguments, and I do think that the lower part of the lineup clearly has to be better and can be better. But, I mean, when you're looking at the top of the lineup, as brutal as it's been, it really stops and ends there. If your star players, your 4-star players, can't figure it out, this team's dead in the water anyway, regardless of whether they back into the playoffs or not. I mean, if the Mets back into the playoffs on the back of the early start that they had, that's fine and well, and you never know what happens. But if that's what happens and they never figure it out over the next 47 games, they're going to really back in with a really crummy record, and there's going to be 5 teams ahead of them in the playoffs that are significantly better. I don't think the Mets are that far off from any of those teams. I really do think that the best that this Mets team has to offer can compete with anybody in the National League, but we haven't seen it. And these star players in particular have been just wildly inconsistent. Now let's talk about the pitching over the last 30 days. David Peterson, he continues to be good. Any sample size you look at, 2.32 ERA over his last 5 starts. Sean Manaea, 3.52 ERA over his last 5 starts. You also look at batting average against. People are hitting only 209 against him so far, 0.96 whip. Manaea looks good. Clay Holmes, last 5 starts, 4.13 ERA. He has not killed you, but Frankie Montas has 7.11 ERA. Kodai Senga hasn't been much better, 6.19 ERA. It's been a rough set of games here for this newfound Mets rotation where, sure, David Peterson and Sean Manaea, 2/5 of your rotation are okay, but the other 3/5 have been pretty rough. And so I talked about this on the live stream after the game on Wednesday. While I'm not pinning the Mets' offensive struggles solely on the starting pitching, I do think there's something to be said about just a collective negative momentum or just a collective struggle this team's gone through where when your starting pitching puts you in an early hole, and this team just hasn't shown the fight to get back into games. They just sort of crumble. It seems like everything has to go perfect. They have to just have the rally that results in a couple runs early, and then if that happens and they get a good start, well, then they'll tack on, and that'll be those games that'll carry the Mets when it comes to their stats over a stretch of time. Or you say, oh, they're still averaging like 4.5 runs a game. Well, it's because of those games where they scored 8-9 runs, potentially off of bad relievers at the end of the games too, just tacking on in that way. So this team right now is grasping to find some answers. I don't think that there's much that you can do to jolt this offense other than, hey, the star players need to play well. The pitching, though, there is some room for improvement, certainly with some of these starters, just as far as getting more into the flow of the season, then obviously the stuff that we've been talking about with the guys that could help coming from AAA. There's no reinforcements that'll help this lineup. They just have to hit better. And it's hard to really pinpoint what they can do differently because I don't know if batting Lindor leadoff again is what's going to spark this team and having Nimmo clean up. I don't know if those things matter. I think they just have to collectively stop pressing maybe, but you just never know in baseball. All it might take is going into Milwaukee and facing off against the best team in baseball and coming out with a series victory to maybe give this team the momentum they need to move forward from this point on and be a good baseball team again. I want to talk about who they're facing this weekend in just a minute, because I'm not just exaggerating when I say the best team in baseball. This literally has been by far the best team in baseball lately, and really for a couple of months now. So how are the Mets going to combat with the loaded Brewers? We're going to talk about that more here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to the ballpark with your friends and family and check out a game? Maybe it's game day. You suddenly realize you want to be in the ballpark. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying your tickets. Game Time is the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming MLB game like Mets versus Brewers over the weekend. My dad's going to be there with my brother-in-law, and then I think my nephew, his grandson's going to the game on Sunday, as well as my sister. So if you want to check out the game and potentially run into my dad in Milwaukee, use Game Time. I told them to use Game Time. They're going to wait until they're about to walk into the ballpark to get their tickets. You should do the same. Game Time is the official ticketing partner, again, of Locked On MLB. Take the guesswork out of buying your tickets to Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account. Use the code Locked On MLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem the code Locked On MLB. That's LOCKEDON MLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. Now, the Mets have squared off against the Brewers in a series this season at the beginning of July, and they won that series. That was right before the 4th of July. Since then, since the 4th of July, the Brewers have the best record in baseball at 22-5. They came out of that series versus the Mets. They went to Miami, won 2 out of 3 in Miami, taking the first and last game of that series. That last game started a 11-game winning streak where they swept the Dodgers and the Nationals, went to LA, swept the Dodgers again before finally losing a game in Seattle, their second game of that series, but they still won the series overall. So you add it up. Let's see. It was the Miami series, 2 against the Dodgers, 1 against the Nationals, 1 against the Mariners, 5 series wins in a row. They lost the series to the Marlins after that, but then they beat the Cubs and have since won 6 games in a row, sweeping a road trip in DC and Atlanta. They've been unbelievable. And you look at what they've done. Their starting pitchers have a 2.93 ERA during this span, second best to only the Cubs. Compare that to the Mets. The Mets starters have a 4.79 ERA during this span. The Brewers bullpen 3.32 ERA, the Mets 3.80. The only team that has scored more runs than the Brewers since July 4th is the Toronto Blue Jays. And they're also the only team that has a higher WRC+. WRC+ is weighted runs created plus, measuring hitters on a league average of 100. For the Brewers, their WRC+ has been 124. They've also scored 161 runs over the past 30 days, 27 games. 5.96 runs per game scored by the Brewers. That's insane to be averaging 6 runs a game. And they're hitting 289 as a team, 353 on base, 444 slug. The Mets have scored 121 runs during that same period, 4.48 runs per game. They're hitting 224, 304 on base, 372 slug. I don't even know if they have a hitter that's over 289 with their batting average. It's just been an awful stretch for the Mets, while the Brewers have been unbelievable. And that's where you talk about this series and you look at the head-to-head, and we'll talk about the pitching matchups more in the next segment. But the Mets are absolutely overmatched in this series, and it's not even close. I mean, the Brewers right now have this lineup that's just firing on all cylinders. All these guys are locked in. They're giving great at-bats. They're getting hits. They're doing what they can. Let me pull up the Brewers' individual stats over the past 30 days for the hitters. Let's see here. Brew Crew. Where are we at? There we go. All right. So, yeah, I'm already laughing at some of these numbers. Andrew Vaughn's the crazy one. 435 batting average, 481 on base, 804 slug, 1285 OPS. in 12 games. This is actually the last 15 days. Let me actually span to the last 30. Last 30, Vaughn, 375 average, 434 on base, 681 slug, 6 home runs, 24 RBIs in 20 games. Jackson Chourio, who I believe is on the injured list now, if I'm not mistaken. But Chourio has been really good in this stretch, 377 average and OPS over 1,000. Tyler Black, that's only 3 games. Isaac Collins, 347 average, 449 on base, 507 slug, 956 OPS, putting himself in the rookie of the year conversation. Let's see who else you got. Sal Frelick hitting 343. Andrew Monasterio, 375. Caleb Durbin hitting 300. It's Yelich is hitting 268. William Contreras, 277. All of those guys have an OPS over 750. And you got Bryce Terang, who's got an OPS of 738. 256 average, 287 on base, 451 slug. The guys that play consistently that aren't hitting, Joey Ortiz hasn't been great. Anthony Siegler hasn't been great. But that's about it. I mean, they're just loaded right now. Offensively, they have really good pitchers. It's just a brutal matchup for a Mets team that's trying to get back on track. And the thing is, let's just say the Mets can't get back on track in this series. You say, oh, the schedule lightens up. We've talked about this in one of the most recent shows too, as I broke it all down. But yeah, you get through the Brewers. You have an off day on Monday too. So no matter what happens, you get to decompress. This is a very strange series with a day off before and after the set. But then you come home and you got to face the Braves, which, yes, the Braves are a bad team, but not against the Mets. You face the Mariners next, who are rejuvenated in their starting lineup. Although I think Josh Naylor got scratched today in the middle of a game, so we'll see what happens there. But regardless, then you have a day off. You go on the road. You face the Nationals and the Braves. So theoretically, sure, you look at that stretch and you say, all right, 9 games against below 500 teams. Maybe the Mets can take advantage, and potentially they do, and hopefully that is the case, and they're able to carry that momentum into one of their final 2 series against the Phillies that'll take place at the end of this month. But I mean, there's a world where they lose again this weekend. The Braves embarrassed them twice in that stretch. And who knows where the Mets are at when they're facing the Phillies. They could be at that point completely out of the division race. The Phillies could be running away with the National League East. Or you show some pride, you beat the Brewers, you get the day off, you get revenge on the Braves for earlier in the season, you beat up on them at home because they're not a good team. You find your way to beat the Mariners, you put together a good homestand, you go on the road, you do what you got to do against the Nationals and the Braves again, and then maybe you're right back in the race, and 2 weeks from now, we're looking at this team completely differently when they are about to square off against the Phillies. We'll see. We'll see what the Mets can do to stop the bleeding, but this series is vitally important. I hope that the Mets had that off day to reset collectively and just get back to playing baseball, get back to the basics, and stop pressing. It's a weird thing to say. You want the team to try harder, but stop pressing, because ultimately it is that effort, the taking too many swings before games, the pressure you put on yourself. If I got to come through, and then, well, now you're playing tight and you don't. So there's a real balance the Mets have to strike, and we haven't seen them lately find that. But hopefully in this series against the Brewers, with maybe my dad being a little bit of a rabbit's foot out there for the final 2 games of this series, maybe the Mets can get on track and put themselves in a position to have some momentum going into the next homestand that maybe they can carry over for the next few weeks. And again, when the Phillies come to town the end of August, hopefully they'll be ready for them. But for now, they got to handle the business that's in front of them. What's in front of them is a ridiculously good Brewers team that's going to throw out their quality starter in each of these games. So what are the pitching matchups? What will the Mets do on Saturday? Who is going to make a start? Seems like no top prospects, or I can tell you right now there will be no top prospects that are coming, as Brandon Sproat made a start on Thursday. So we're going to talk about Sproat, and we're going to talk about this upcoming series in the next segment. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy platform that lets you turn your football predictions into real rewards. Preseason's already heating up, and college football isn't far behind. It's the perfect time to lock in your season-long, more or less picks for the 2025 football season, all before week 1 kicks off. Whether you've got an eye on big-name quarterbacks or breakout running backs, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in the game. I've already made a few of my season-long picks. You see Josh Allen with his more or less on touchdown set at 27.5. He's getting more. I feel like that's a solid shot to take. So that's what I did. And the flex play options is a total game changer because even when one of your picks misses, you'll still double your money. Down the Prize Picks app today, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 or to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, run your game. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. It's our texting service where you get updates from me. Anytime news breaks in the Mets, you can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways, and you get the lineup graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, we've been talking about it for the last couple of days, if not weeks. When will the Mets promote one of their top pitching prospects? And I said on the show before the off day, we'd have to wait and see, but Brandon Sproat was not pitching on Wednesday and be very curious to see if he pitched on Thursday. Unfortunately, he pitched on Thursday, so he's not coming up this week. He allowed 3 runs on 3 hits, 2 walks, 4 strikeouts, needed only 84 pitches to get through 6 innings. Really only had 1 bad inning in the 5th where he walked a batter with 1 out. Allowed that runner to advance on a wild pitch, then gave up a double that scored 1 after he struck out the next batter following the double. He gave up a 2-run homer, and that was all the runs that he allowed. But he still went back out for the 6th, had a 1-2-3 inning, and overall just a really good start. I think the Mets at this point are waiting to resolve their situation with Paul Blackburn and Frankie Montas before they call up one of these guys. And I understand exhausting your MLB depth before tapping into your AAA depth, especially when, as I talked about in the first segment, nothing is running away or no team is going to grab that 3rd spot and run away from the Mets right now. They have that ability to sort of play the long game, knowing that they get into the dance and they get hot at the right time. All this can be washed away, but they are certainly backing into it right now. They have to get back to the point where they are, pushing towards the division, really. And so I hope at some point they decide to integrate some of these the 2 top pitching prospects, whether that is in the bullpen, in the rotation, some type of hybrid roles. I think they are 2 of the Mets' best 13 pitchers right now. And with that said, they should be up at the big league level at some point here down the stretch because you're trying to win, and those guys can help. But this weekend, you're not going to see them. So we'll talk about who you will see. First matchup tonight's a great one. Kodai Senga versus Brandon Woodruff. Woodruff had shoulder surgery that he was rehabbing from, now back, has made 5 starts, has a 2.22 ERA. 4 of those 5 starts have been quality starts. He's gone 6 innings, and he's not allowed more than 2 runs this season. He did have a start where he allowed 2 runs and got knocked out of the game in the middle of the 5th inning, but that's it. He doesn't throw a lot of pitches. We haven't seen him get over 90, I don't believe. But he's still giving the Brewers 6 innings because he's so effective in the zone. He's pounding the strike zone. He's even getting his strikeouts, 37 strikeouts and 28 1/3 innings pitched. He looks like the old Brandon Woodruff. So that's a very tough matchup for this lineup to square off against, but you have the hitters to do it. You need Juan Soto to do his thing against a good pitcher and hit a home run or get this team going. You need Lindor, Alonso, Nimmo, McNeil, all these guys to just figure it out and find a way to hit. But it's not going to be easy with some of the arms the Mets are going up against because once you get that started out of the game, it's not like it gets any easier with that Brewers bullpen. It might even get more difficult. Now on Saturday, again, TBD. My assumption at this point, either Blackburn or Montas. I'm sort of thinking that it's going to be Blackburn with Montas available in long relief. And if Blackburn pitches a gem and you're in position to win a game, obviously you don't go to Montas and maybe you save him for the next time there is a blow up, which would mean the Mets are going to have to drop somebody from their roster. My assumption would be Justin Hageman would go, and then you'd add Paul Blackburn, and you just kind of roll with that for a little bit until you decided that there might be a better way to use those final couple spots in your bullpen down the stretch if it really isn't conducive to roster both Montas and Blackburn. Maybe they DFA one of those guys at some point. Maybe they DFA both of those guys, or those swallowing the money for Montas's contract next year. That's going to be a tough one to really do. But getting back to the series, Saturday, Logan Henderson will go for the Brewers. Henderson's a rookie, was a 1.78 ERA in 5 starts. He made 1 start in April, 3 starts in May, and then now he made one in August. He allowed 1 run on 3 hits, 2 walks, 4 strikeouts, 4 1/3 innings pitched. But a guy in Henderson that has thrown the ball really well all year long in AAA when he's down the big leagues and has made the most of all of his starts. So even though it's a relatively inexperienced big league starter, it's not necessarily a guy that you can just expect the Mets to tee off on. It's certainly not going to be the case. Then you get the final game of the series, Shaman I versus Quinn Priester. Priester has a 3.15 ERA in 21 games, 16 of them being starts. So maybe they've used an opener at times for Priester, but that's over 114 1/3 innings pitched. He has been a very solid starter for the Brewers after they traded for him early on in this season. But that's the scoop for this series. Those are the 3 pitching matchups. The Mets need to see that continued progression from Shaman I. Last time out, it looked like he was going to cruise through 6 or 7 innings, and then he had a disastrous 5th. We'll see if he can face the lineup a couple times through without running into any problems. That's going to be important. Kodai Senga getting his season back on track is vitally important. And then whatever they do on Saturday is going to be very interesting. How do they decide to go with their struggling veterans at this point? Now, Blackburn has been on the injured list, but when he was on the big league roster, he struggled to adapt to that long relief role. And if he's not going to fill that role, then is he just in the rotation and Montas is the long reliever? And how does Montas feel about that? Not to mention you still have that issue of trying to work those top pitchers that you have in AAA, those top prospects, into the fold as well. So it's not going to be easy for the Mets to figure out what the best course of action is. All you can hope for is you start playing better, and then all of these little questions and concerns, they either fade or they become just footnotes. And so that's what you're hoping for with the Mets right now, that they can have a good weekend series against the Brewers and try to get rid of all of this angst and frustration that has been surrounding this team for way too long at this point. And it's getting to that level where even though the standings are pretty solid in the Mets' favor, you start to lose hope on this team. And I don't want to lose hope in this team. So my hope is that they find a way to win this series over the weekend. But that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I appreciate all of you for tuning in. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can follow me on social media at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day, not for your second watch. Head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything, the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with the local host from each team, league-wide host from each league. By Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.